Welcome to the Shadow Slaves. The afternoon heat pressed itself against the windows of Maison Duvil like a visitor no one had invited. Thick, stubborn, relentless. Inside the drawing room, where crystal chandeliers cast their light over gleaming mahogany furniture, three men sat trapped in a silence that felt suffocating. Beyond the French doors, magnolias filled the garden with their perfume, though their white petals were already beginning to brown at the edges. Beautiful things, after all, never lasted long in New Orleans. Antoine Duvil, the eldest at 32, occupied their father's chair, as though it had always belonged to him. His jaw carried the same proud line that had once made Jean-Baptiste Duvil both respected and feared across Louisiana. He held the attorney's letter between fingers that trembled just slightly, though he would sooner die than admit it. "The estate passes to all three of you in equal measure," he read aloud, his voice carrying that clipped authority typical of a man unaccustomed to sharing. "The plantation, the holdings in the city, the people," interrupted Mathieu, the middle brother. At 29, he had a gentleness about him that made the servants speak kindly of him when they believed no one was listening. He stood by the window, watching Spanish moss sway from trees that had witnessed 2 centuries' worth of secrets. "Father owned 73 souls. We need to speak plainly about what we've inherited." The youngest, Christophe, laughed without any humor in it. At 25, he possessed their mother's wild beauty, but none of his brother's pretense at civility. 73 souls. How biblical you make it sound, brother, as if we're saving them rather than profiting from their misery. "Enough," Antoine snapped, the letter crumpling slightly in his grip. "Tell me in the comments which country you are from, and what you thought of this story. And if this story made an impression on you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future stories. We didn't make this world. We simply live in it." But Mathieu wasn't finished. "There's something Father used to say in his final months, about a promise he'd made, about someone being freed." The room seemed to grow colder despite the heat. Antoine's eyes narrowed. "Father said many things when the fever took him. Delirium isn't legally binding." A soft knock interrupted them. The door opened, and she entered. Amélie moved through the room the way a prayer moves through a cathedral. Quietly, inevitably, impossible to ignore. She wore a simple dress of cream linen that somehow appeared more elegant than the finest silks worn by the ladies on Royal Street. Her skin held the warmth of honey and sunlight, and her eyes, those eyes the color of aged whiskey, met each brother's gaze in turn before she lowered them in practiced deference. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the musical lilt of French mixed with something older, something that predated the city itself. "I've brought refreshments as you requested." She set the silver tray on the side table with movements so graceful they seemed choreographed. Crystal glasses filled with mint julep beaded with condensation, the scent of bourbon and crushed mint filled the air. Antoine watched her with the intensity of a man studying a ledger, calculating value and risk. Mathieu's gaze held something softer, almost apologetic, as if he wished to explain that he wasn't like his brothers. And Christophe stared with naked desire that would have been scandalous had she been anyone other than what she was. "Thank you, Amélie," Mathieu said quietly. "That will be all." But Antoine raised a hand. "A moment." He stood approaching her with measured steps. "You were Father's favorite. He kept you close these last years." "I cared for Monsieur Duvil in his illness," Amélie replied, her eyes still lowered. "As he required." "And did he speak to you in those final days?" Antoine circled her slowly, and she remained perfectly still, a doe sensing the hunter's approach. "Did he make you any promises?" The silence stretched like pulled taffy. Through the windows, a bird called, a mockingbird doing what mockingbirds do best, stealing other creatures' songs and making them its own. Your father spoke of many things, Amélie said carefully. Regrets mostly. The things all dying men speak of. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have, monsieur. Christophe laughed again, this time with genuine amusement. For God's sake, Antoine, let her be. She's not hiding father's fortune in her petticoats. The vulgarity made Mathieu wince, but Amélie's expression never changed. She had learned long ago that the greatest weapon a woman in her position possessed was the ability to become invisible while remaining completely seen. You may go, Antoine finally said, his frustration evident. She curtsied, a movement so fluid it seemed to mock the gesture's subservience, and left. But as she reached the door, she paused and looked back. For just a moment, her eyes met Mathieu's, and something passed between them that made the gentle brother's breath catch. When the door closed, Christophe poured himself a generous measure of bourbon from the tray. Well, that was magnificently uncomfortable. Shall we duel over her now? Or wait until after dinner? Don't be absurd, Antoine said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I being absurd? Christophe swirled the amber liquid in his glass. We're three men who've just inherited a beautiful woman, along with the furniture and livestock. Father kept her closer than his own wife in those final years. You don't find that curious? The Mateau's voice was tight. She's not a possession to be divided like the silver. Isn't she? Christophe's smile was cruel. According to the laws of Louisiana and God himself, she's exactly that. The question is, which of us gets to decide what happens to her? Antoine returned to their father's chair, the letter now completely crushed in his fist. Nothing happens to her. She continues her duties, as do all the others. We have a plantation to run, crops to bring in. The sugar won't harvest itself. But his words rang hollow, and all three brothers knew it. Something had shifted in the room when Amélie entered, like a ship's compass spinning wildly near hidden metal. Each man had looked at her differently, wanted something different from her, and in those divergent desires lay the seeds of something dangerous. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. The afternoon rains would come soon, as they always did in New Orleans summers. Sudden, violent, washing the streets clean while changing nothing beneath the surface. Amélie moved through the servants' quarters with her tray, past the kitchen, where Claudette stirred a pot of gumbo that would feed 20 people, past the laundry, where Josephine scrubbed sheets until her hands bled, past the sleeping quarters, where children too young to work played with corn, husk dolls. She climbed the narrow stairs to her room, a space apart from the others, neither fully in the house nor fully out of it, just as she was neither fully enslaved nor fully free. Her room was small but private, a privilege that made the other enslaved women resent her, even as they pitied her. A narrow bed with clean sheets, a washstand with a cracked mirror, a trunk containing the fine dresses Jean-Baptiste had given her, and hidden beneath a loose floorboard, wrapped in oilcloth, a document bearing his signature, witnessed and notarized, promising her freedom upon his death. She had watched Antoine burn the original will in Jean-Baptiste's study 3 days after the funeral, while she stood in the shadows, unseen. He'd done it methodically, efficiently, turning her future to ash with the same casual authority he might use to swat a mosquito. Amélie sat on her bed and removed the document from its hiding place. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. The only copy, the only proof that Jean-Baptiste Duvil had kept at least one promise in his life of broken vows. But paper meant nothing without men willing to honor it, and the Duvil brothers had inherited their father's talent for convenient memory. She thought of Antoine's calculating stare, measuring her value like a horse at auction. Mathieu's apologetic eyes that saw her suffering, but would do nothing to end it. Christophe's naked hunger that cared nothing for her personhood, only his desire. 3 brothers, 3 different kinds of cruelty, each believing himself better than his brothers while being exactly the same. Through her window she could see the plantation stretching to the horizon. Rows of sugarcane like prison bars. The quarters where families slept in spaces smaller than the Duvil wine cellar. The overseer's house where screams sometimes echoed on punishment days. This was the empire the brothers had inherited, built on blood and sugar, and the fiction that some humans were less than others. Jean-Baptiste had whispered to her in his final delirium, his fever, bright eyes seeking a forgiveness she couldn't give. "I tried to make it right," he'd said. "The will, you'll be free. I made it right." But men like Jean-Baptiste Duvil never made anything right. They only created new kinds of wrong and called it progress. Amélie refolded the document and returned it to its hiding place. The floorboard settled with a soft click that sounded like a door closing, or perhaps opening. She moved to her mirror, that cracked, imperfect reflection that showed her face in fragments. Beautiful, they called her. Tempting. Dangerous. As if beauty was something she'd chosen. As if it wasn't another chain they'd hung around her neck. But if they wanted to see her as dangerous, perhaps she would become exactly that. She thought of the way each brother had looked at her differently, wanted different things from her. How easy it would be to give each man exactly what he thought he wanted, while taking everything they never knew they were offering. Thunder rolled closer now. The storm was coming. Amélie smiled at her fractured reflection, and in that moment, she looked exactly like what the Duvil brothers feared most, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Downstairs, the 3 brothers continued their argument about money and property and the future of an empire built on suffering. They would talk for hours, drink their bourbon, make their plans. Not one of them noticed how their thoughts kept returning to the same thing. To her. To Amélie. To the woman who had just decided that if she couldn't buy her freedom, she would take it. One brother at a time. Antoine Duvil prided himself on control. While his brothers spent their inheritance on gambling and women, he'd built the Duvil sugar operation into something formidable. By dawn, he rode the plantation rows, checking every detail. By dusk, he'd reviewed every ledger, balanced every account. Control meant survival in Louisiana, where fortunes rose and fell with the Mississippi's moods and the price of sugar in New York markets. But lately, control had become as slippery as creek mud. It started small, a glance held too long across the dinner table. Amélie's hand lingering on his shoulder as she poured his evening brandy. The scent of jasmine that followed her through rooms and invaded his sleep. Antoine told himself it meant nothing. She was performing her duties, nothing more. Yet here he was, 3 weeks after his father's funeral, standing outside her door at midnight like some love-struck fool. The servants' quarters were quiet, except for the usual sound, someone snoring, a baby's distant cry, the creak of old wood settling. Antoine had never ventured here before. It was beneath him, the domain of his overseer. But tonight he'd found himself walking these narrow hallways, as if pulled by invisible strings. He knocked softly. The door opened immediately, as if she'd been expecting him. Amélie wore a simple white nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders in waves that caught the candlelight. Her feet were bare. Without the armor of her daytime dresses and that careful deference, she looked younger, more vulnerable. It made Antoine's throat tight. "Monsieur," she said, surprise coloring her voice. though her eyes held none. "Is something wrong? I need to speak with you." His voice came out rougher than intended. "May I come in?" She hesitated, a calculated pause that made him feel both powerful and desperate, then stepped aside. Her room was smaller than his dressing closet, furnished with only essentials, but it was clean, orderly, reflecting a dignity that made Antoine suddenly ashamed of his own excess. "I'll stand," he said when she gestured toward the single chair. "This won't take long." She waited, hands folded, eyes downcast. The perfect picture of submission, yet somehow Antoine felt like the one being controlled. "My father," he began, then stopped, started again. "My father kept you close these last years, closer than was appropriate. Your father was ill. He required care. He required many things. But you weren't a nurse, Amélie. You were something else." Her gaze lifted then, meeting his directly for the first time. Those amber eyes held depths he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge before. Intelligence. Anger. A hunger that matched his own. "What was I then?" she asked softly. Antoine moved closer, drawn despite himself. "I don't know. That's what troubles me. I've managed this plantation for 10 years. I know every acre, every worker, every barrel of sugar we produce. But you," he reached out, his fingers barely brushing her cheek. "You're an unknown variable, dangerous." "Am I?" She didn't move away from his touch. "And what danger do I pose to a man like you, Monsieur Duvil? A man with money, power, the law itself on his side. The worst kind." His thumb traced her jawline. "The kind that makes a man forget who he is." She leaned into his touch just slightly. "Perhaps you've forgotten nothing. Perhaps you're simply becoming who you always were." The words should have angered him, but instead they ignited something dark and wanting in his chest. He pulled her closer, his other hand tangling in her hair. "My brothers watch you, too. I've seen how Mathieu looks at you with his poet's eyes, how Christophe undresses you with his. Do you encourage them? Would it matter if I did?" Her breath was warm against his throat. "You all believe you own me. What difference does it make which master I serve?" "It makes every difference." He kissed her then, rough and claiming, and she responded with a passion that felt like surrender and victory at once. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Antoine gripped her shoulders. "You belong to me now, not to them. Me. Do you understand?" Amélie's smile was small secret. "Yes, Monsieur." "Say my name." Antoine. Hearing his name on her lips broke something in him. He pulled her toward the bed, dimly aware that he was crossing a threshold he could never uncross. But Amélie moved with him willingly, her hands already working the buttons of his shirt, her mouth finding his again with a hunger that seemed to consume them both. Later, as Antoine lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, Amélie traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips. The candle had burned low, casting dancing shadows on walls too close together. "Tell me about the will," she said quietly. Antoine tensed. "What will?" "Your father's." "The real one." Her finger circled his heart. "The one you burned." He should have been furious at her presumption. Instead, he found himself answering. There was no real will, only an old man's fevered fantasy. He wanted to free you, give you money, as if that would erase everything that came before. Would it have been so terrible? Her voice held no accusation, only curiosity. One woman freed becomes 10, becomes 100. The whole system unravels. He caught her hand, pressed it flat against his chest. "You don't understand economics, business. Everything we have, everything we are, depends on things staying as they are. I understand more than you think." She raised herself on one elbow, looking down at him. "I understand that your father felt guilt, that he tried, in his way, to make amends. And I understand that you took that possibility away from me without hesitation." Would you have left? The question surprised him. If you'd been freed. Amélie was quiet for a long moment. Where would I go? North, where I'd freeze and starve. Back to the Louisiana Bayou country, where I'd be caught and sold again. Freedom is a fine word, Antoine, but it's just a word without means to survive it. Then perhaps you're better off here. He pulled her down against him. With me. She laughed softly, sadly. Yes, perhaps. But her eyes, those dangerous amber eyes, held something he couldn't read. Something that whispered he'd just made a terrible mistake, while believing himself in complete control. In the weeks that followed, Antoine found reasons to visit Amélie's room nearly every night. He told himself it was just physical need, easily satisfied and forgotten by morning. But the truth crept in through the cracks of his certainty. He began bringing her small gifts, a silk scarf from a merchant on Canal Street, a book of French poetry, a silver comb for her hair. He asked about her childhood, her thoughts, her dreams, as if she were a real person and not his property. And most dangerously, he began to need her opinions on plantation matters, business decisions, even his brother's. Mathieu seems distant lately, he mentioned one night, his head in her lap as she combed his hair with the silver comb he'd given her. Distracted. Perhaps he's troubled. Her fingers were gentle, soothing. Your brother has a conscience that weighs on him. A conscience is an expensive luxury in our business. And Christophe. She paused in her combing. He's been drinking more, gambling. Last week, he came home at dawn, covered in someone else's blood. Antoine frowned. How do you know this? I see things. Hear things. I'm part of the furniture, remember? People speak freely around furniture. He sat up, suddenly uneasy. What else do you see? In here. Amélie's smile was enigmatic. That you're a good man trying to do terrible things. That your brothers envy you but also need you. That this house holds more secrets than the family crypt. You speak in riddles. I speak in truths you're not ready to hear. Antoine caught her wrist, pulling her close. Then perhaps you should stop speaking altogether. But as he kissed her, he realized the trap had already been sprung. He'd come to her room seeking dominance and found instead a strange, desperate dependence. Amélie had become as essential as air, and he had no idea when it had happened. Downstairs, in the darkened library, Mathieu stood at the window, watching his brother's shadow moving in Amélie's window. His hands were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight with emotions he couldn't name and dared not speak. He'd seen Antoine slip through the quarters 3 times this week alone, had watched his brother transform from their father's cold, calculating hair into something hunted and hunting all at once. And Mathieu understood, because he felt it too, that pull toward Amélie like gravity toward earth, inevitable and potentially fatal. In the drawing room, Christophe poured his 4th bourbon of the evening and laughed to no one. His brothers were fools, both of them. They thought Amélie was just another conquest, another possession to be claimed. But Christophe knew better. He'd spent enough time in the gambling houses and brothels of New Orleans to recognize a woman who was playing her own game. He'd seen that look in her eyes, the same look card sharps wore when they knew they held the winning hand. The question was, what exactly was Amélie playing for? And how many Duvil brothers would be left standing when the game was done? Mathieu had always been the different one. While Antoine calculated and Christophe indulged, he read poetry and walked alone through the gardens, wondering how his family had built an empire on such profound evil and convinced themselves it was virtue. His mother had died bringing him into the world, and sometimes Mathieu thought he'd carried that guilt like original sin, responsible for suffering simply by existing. Father had called him weak, Antoine called him soft. Christophe called him a hypocrite for benefiting from slavery while mourning it. Perhaps they were all correct. It was late afternoon when Mathieu found Amélie lie in the kitchen garden, gathering herbs for the evening meal. The sun painted everything golden. The basil leaves in her basket, the curve of her neck, the small beads of perspiration on her forehead. She wore a faded blue dress, and her hair was covered by a simple cotton wrap. Without the fine clothes his father had given her, she looked more herself somehow, more real. "Amélie," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned and something flickered across her face. Surprise, then careful neutrality. "Monsieur Mathieu, can I help you with something? I was taking a walk. Saw you here." He gestured vaguely toward the garden paths, immediately feeling foolish. "May I speak with you?" A pause. She glanced toward the house, calculating something. Of course. They stood separated by rows of thyme and rosemary, the afternoon heat pressing down like judgment. Mathieu searched for words and found only inadequate ones. "I know about Antoine," he finally said. "About his visits to your quarters." Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture tightened. "And what concern is that of yours, monsieur? I worry for you." The words tumbled out. "My brother is not a gentleman. If he's forcing you, if you need protection." Protection. Her laugh was bitter. "From your brother. And who would protect me from you, Mathieu?" "From Christophe. From every white man in Louisiana who thinks my body is his birthright." The words hit him like physical blows. "I'm not like them. Aren't you?" She set down her basket and moved closer, anger giving her courage. "You walk through this plantation reading your poetry, mourning the cruelty you see, and yet you do nothing. You own me just as much as Antoine does. You profit from my slavery just as much as Christophe. At least they're honest about what they are. That's not fair." "Fair." Her voice rose. "You want to speak to me about fair? I was 8 years old when your father bought me."
8, Mathieu?
"Do you know what happened to my mother? They sold her south, to a sugar plantation in Louisiana's deep territory. I never saw her again. Fair. There's nothing fair about this world, and your gentle conscience changes nothing." Mathieu felt tears sting his eyes, ashamed of his own weakness. "I know you're right, but I wish I could." "What? Save me?" She was close enough now that he could smell jasmine and herbs and sweat, like some night in one of your poems. "Wake up, Mathieu. This isn't a story. There are no noble rescues. There's only survival. Then let me help you survive." He grasped her hands, desperate. "Tell me what you need. Money. Papers. I can forge documents. I know people in the north who help." "Your brother burned the document that would have freed me." Amélie's voice was flat now, exhausted. "Your father promised me freedom, put it in writing, and Antoine destroyed it like it was nothing. What makes you think papers matter when men like him exist?" Mathieu pulled her closer, and she didn't resist. "I'm sorry for all of it, for what my family has done, for what I've failed to do. Sorry doesn't change anything. I know, but I need you to know it anyway." He tilted her chin up, their faces inches apart. "I need you to know that not all of us are monsters." "No," she whispered. "Some of you are just cowards." The words should have made him release her, step back, accept his judgment. Instead, they pushed him forward. His mouth found hers, and she responded with a passion that felt like punishment and absolution at once. They stumbled backward into the garden shed, surrounded by tools and clay pots and the smell of earth. Mathieu's hands shook as he touched her, afraid of his own hunger. Ashamed of wanting something so deeply that belonged to someone else. Or rather, someone who shouldn't belong to anyone at all. "This is wrong." He breathed against her throat. "Everything about this is wrong." "I agree," she said, pulling him closer. But at least you know it. Afterward, they lay on sacking that smelled of fertilizer, their bodies tangled, both breathing hard. Mathieu stared at the shed's wooden ceiling and felt his world cracking like old glass. Does Antoine know you feel this way? Amélie asked quietly. About slavery. About everything. He knows. He doesn't care. Mathieu turned to face her. We argued terribly after Father's funeral. I wanted to free some of the workers, the older ones at least. Antoine called me a child playing at revolution. And Christophe thinks the whole system is hilarious. A cosmic joke played on all of us. He traced her arm with one finger, memorizing the feeling. He told me once that if we're all going to hell anyway, we might as well enjoy the ride. Amélie was quiet for a moment. Your brothers are dangerous in different ways. Antoine with his cold certainty. Christophe with his reckless hunger. But you, Mathieu, she touched his face gently. You might be the most dangerous of all. How? Because you make me hope. And hope is fatal for someone like me. The words broke something in Mathieu's chest. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I'll find a way. I'll get you free somehow. I swear it. But even as he made the promise, he knew it was empty. He was a second son with no real authority, no means to act without his brother's knowledge. His conscience was a luxury funded by the very system he claimed to oppose. Amélie seemed to sense his thoughts. Don't make promises you can't keep. Mathieu, it's crueler than silence. They dressed in heavy silence, both aware they'd crossed a line that would reshape everything. As they prepared to leave separately, her first, him waiting a respectable interval. Amélie paused at the door. Your brother visits me at night, she said without looking back. Antoine. He thinks he owns me in a new way now. Something beyond just legal ownership. He's starting to need me, and need makes people do terrible things. I won't let him hurt you. She laughed softly, sadly. He's already hurting me. They all are. Even you. She turned then, and her eyes held infinite wariness. But thank you for pretending it matters. Then she was gone, leaving Mathieu alone among the garden tools and his own inadequacy. The following days blurred into a kind of waking nightmare. Mathieu found himself watching Amélie lie obsessively, noting every time Antoine touched her arm at dinner, every knowing glance between them, every midnight shadow moving toward the quarters. His jealousy surprised him with its viciousness. He'd always thought himself above such base emotions, but love, he was learning, made hypocrites of everyone. He began his own nocturnal visits, timing them for when Antoine was busy with ledgers or away in the city. Amélie never refused him entry, never seemed surprised when he knocked. They would talk for hours, sometimes Mathieu asking about her life, her thoughts, trying desperately to know her, as a person rather than a possession. Other times they barely spoke, their bodies communicating what words couldn't: desperation, longing, the certain knowledge that all of this was temporary and doomed. Tell me about when you were young, he asked one night, his head on her breast, listening to her heartbeat. Before my father bought you. Amélie's hand stilled in his hair. Why? So you can feel worse about what your family stole from me? Maybe. Or maybe because I want to know who you'd have become if the world had been different. She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, Mother was a seamstress. Free initially. She'd bought her freedom before I was born. We lived in a small house in the Treme. Nothing grand, but it was ours. She made dresses for wealthy women. Intricate embroidery. I was learning the trade. What happened? What always happens? A white man accused her of theft. A lie. But it didn't matter. They couldn't re-enslave her directly, but they arrested her, sold me to cover the supposed debt, then sold her when she protested. Legal slavery dressed up as justice. Mathieu felt sick. Did she teach you? Before, she taught me to sew, to read secretly. That was illegal, but she risked it anyway. To keep a part of myself hidden where no one could touch it. Amélie's voice grew distant. She told me that they could own our bodies but never our minds. That we could be free inside ourselves, even in chains. Was she right? No. The word was flat, final. They own everything. Your thoughts, your dreams, even your grief. It all belongs to whoever holds your papers. The only freedom is the kind you take by force or trickery. Mathieu raised himself up, looking at her in the dim candlelight. Is that what you're doing with me, with Antoine? Her smile was enigmatic. What do you think? Mathieu, I think you're playing a dangerous game. Using us against each other somehow. And if I am? She met his gaze steadily. Would you blame me? And should have said yes. Should have been angry, hurt, betrayed. Instead, he kissed her forehead gently. No, I'd applaud you. Use me however you need. If it helps you survive this, I'll be your willing fool. Don't say that. You don't know what you're offering. Les. I do. He meant it. If Amélie was using him, he'd let her. If loving her was his penance for a lifetime of complicity, he'd pay it gladly. But as he left her room that night, slipping through the shadows back to the main house, Mathieu couldn't shake the feeling that forces were aligning beyond anyone's control. 3 brothers, 1 woman, and secrets multiplying like kudzu in the humid Louisiana night. In his bedroom, he found Christophe waiting, sprawled in a chair, with a bottle of whiskey dangling from one hand. His youngest brother's grin was sharp as broken glass. The garden shed was inspired. Christophe said conversationally, "But you might want to choose a location without windows next time, brother." Anyone walking past could have seen quite a show. Amétie's blood went cold. How long have you known? About you and Amélie. Since the beginning. About Antoine. Even longer. Christophe took a long drink. It's quite entertaining, really. My brothers fighting over the same enslaved woman like dogs over a bone. Father would have been proud. Or horrified. Hard to say which. Get out of my room. In a moment. Christophe stood swaying slightly. But first, some brotherly advice. She's playing you, Mathieu, both of you. And me, too, probably, though I haven't had my turn yet. The question is, what's her end game? There is no game. She's just trying to survive. Oh, my knave brother. Christophe patted Mathieu's cheek with drunken affection. Everyone's playing a game. The only difference is whether you're smart enough to know the rules. He stumbled toward the door, then paused. One more thing. I've been watching Antoine. He's growing obsessed. Soon he'll want to claim her publicly. Maybe even try to make her his placée. And when that happens, when he tries to formalize what he thinks is his, Christophe's smile was terrible. Well, that's when the real fun begins. Then he was gone, leaving Mathieu alone with his fear and his guilt. And the growing certainty that Christophe was right. They were all puppets dancing on strings they couldn't see, and Amélie held every thread. Christophe Duvil had spent his entire life being underestimated. The youngest son, the wild one, the fool who gambled too much and drank more. Everyone thought they understood him. But Christophe's greatest talent was making people believe their own assumptions, while he moved pieces on a board they didn't know existed. He'd known about Amélie and his brothers for weeks. Hell, he'd probably been the first to truly see what she was doing. Because unlike Antoine's arrogance and Mathieu's guilt, Christophe recognized a fellow player. The question wasn't whether she was manipulating them. The question was, could he manipulate the manipulator? He found her alone one morning in the main house, dusting the library that none of them ever read. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that swirled like tiny stars. She wore a green dress that brought out the gold in her eyes, and her movements were graceful even in servitude. "My brothers are predictable creatures," Christophe announced from the doorway, making her startle. "Antoine comes to you seeking control. Mathieu comes seeking redemption. But me," he closed the door behind him with a soft click, "I come seeking truth." Amélie set down her dustcloth carefully, her expression neutral. "I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Christophe." "Don't you?" He moved closer, circling her like she was a puzzle to be solved. "You've bedded both my brothers. Don't look surprised. I know everything. And you've got them so twisted up they can barely stand to be in the same room anymore. Family dinners have become delightfully tense. So my question is, what are you after?" "Perhaps they came to me," she said coolly. "Did you consider that?" "Oh, I'm sure they did. But you welcomed them, encouraged them, played into their particular fantasies. Antoine's need to dominate, Mathieu's need to save." He stopped directly in front of her. "What I can't figure out is why. Revenge, freedom. Or are you just amusing yourself while they destroy each other?" Amélie's laugh was sharp. "You think very highly of my power, Monsieur. I'm an enslaved woman in Louisiana. I have no power. That's what makes you brilliant." Christophe grasped her chin, tilting her face up. "The most dangerous piece on the board is the one everyone underestimates. And you, beautiful Amélie, have made yourself indispensable to men who think you're dispensable. And what do you want?" Her voice was steady, but he felt her pulse racing beneath his fingers. "To warn me? Threaten me? Or do you simply want your turn?" The directness surprised him. Christophe released her and laughed. "All three, perhaps. But mostly, I want to understand the game before I decide which side I'm on." "There are no sides. Just survival, survival." He tasted the word. "Is that what you call it when you set brothers against each other? When you make Antoine believe he owns you, and Mathieu believe he's saving you? That's not survival, darling. That's warfare." Amélie's composure finally cracked. "And what would you know about warfare? You've never fought for anything in your life. You've had everything handed to you. Money, land, freedom, while people like me fight just to breathe." "You're right." The admission clearly surprised her. "I've never had to fight. But I've spent my whole life watching people fight. And I've learned that the winner isn't always the strongest. It's the one willing to do what others won't." "And what won't I do?" Christophe smiled. "That's what I'm trying to discover." He moved toward the door, then paused. "A warning, since you've been kind enough to entertain my brothers. Antoine is planning to formalize your arrangement. He's going to set you up in a townhouse in the quarter, make you his official placé. He thinks it will solidify his claim." Amélie's face went pale. "When?" "Soon. Maybe next week." Christophe's tone was almost sympathetic. "Once that happens, you'll be locked into a system almost impossible to escape. Legal concubinage, still slavery, just with better furniture. And Mathieu will be devastated, but too weak to stop it. He'll write sad poetry about injustice and do absolutely nothing. As usual." He opened the door. "But you already knew that. You've known what each of us is from the beginning. Then why tell me?" He smiled over his shoulder. "Because I want to see what you'll do about it. And because, unlike my brothers, I'd rather watch the chaos than pretend to control it." That night, Christophe went to her. Not sneaking through shadows like Antoine, not racked with guilt like Mathieu. He walked openly through the quarters, nodded to the few people still awake, and knocked on her door with the confidence of a man who expected to be welcome. Amélie opened it, wearing the expression of someone who'd been expecting this inevitability. "May I come in?" Christophe asked with exaggerated politeness. Or would you prefer to keep pretending we're not all dancing the same sick waltz? She stepped aside. Her room looked different now, that he was seeing it with new eyes. Neat but sparse, everything precisely placed. A room that belonged to someone always ready to flee. In one corner he noticed a small trunk, partially packed. "Running?" he asked, thinking it over. She closed the door. "Your warning earlier. Is it real, or just another game?" "Oh, it's real. Antoine told me over breakfast yesterday. He's found a house on Rampart Street. 3 rooms, garden, courtyard. Very traditional. You'll have a monthly allowance, clothes, jewelry, everything a placier needs, except freedom or respect." Amélie sat on her bed, suddenly looking exhausted. "And if I refuse?" "You think you can refuse Antoine?" Christophe sat beside her, close but not touching. "My eldest brother doesn't handle rejection well. He might sell you to someone far worse. Or convince himself you need discipline. I've seen him break a man's arm over a perceived slight. Imagine what he'd do to someone who humiliated him in front of society. So I'm trapped." "Not necessarily." Christophe pulled out a silver flask, took a drink, offered it to her. She accepted, surprising him. "There might be another option." "Which is me." He smiled at her shocked expression. "Not as your master. That's boring. But as your partner. You want revenge on the Duvil family. I can help. You want money to escape. I know where Antoine hides his cash. You want to watch my brothers destroy each other. I've got a front row seat. Why would you betray your own family?" "Because I'm bored," Christophe said honestly. "And because this whole system is rotten. Antoine pretends it's economics. Mathieu pretends it's tragedy. But I'm honest enough to call it what it is. Theft and rape dressed up as civilization. If it's all going to hell anyway, at least let's make it interesting." Amélie studied him for a long moment. "You're more honest than your brothers. I'll give you that. Honesty is easy when you don't care about being liked." He leaned closer. "So, what do you say? Partners in chaos." Well, she kissed him then, and it was different from with his brothers. No pretense of passion. No performance. Just 2 people acknowledging a transaction, an alliance built on mutual benefit, rather than exploitation masquerading as affection. When they broke apart, Amélie's smile was cold. "All right, Christophe. Let's make a deal." Over the next week they planned. Christophe would provide money, gold coins stolen from Antoine's safe, jewelry taken from their mother's estate, documents he forged using the family seal. Amélie would continue her performance with both brothers, driving them toward confrontation while preparing her escape. The trick, Christophe explained one night, counting out coins, is making them think they're fighting over you, when really they're just fighting themselves. Antoine's pride versus Mathieu's conscience, both fatal flaws. "And yours?" Amélie asked. "What's your fatal flaw?" "The same as yours," he grinned. "We think we're smarter than everyone else. Sometimes we're right. Sometimes that confidence kills us." But even as they schemed, Christophe found himself genuinely intrigued by Amélie. She was sharp, ruthless when necessary, and completely without illusions about what the world was. In another life, another place, they might have been actual partners. "When this is over," he asked one night, "when you're free and far from Louisiana, what will you do?" "Survive," she said simply. "Keep surviving. That's all. That's everything." She looked at him, then really looked at him. "You ask because you can imagine more. But for people like me, survival isn't the beginning. It's the whole story." The words stayed with Christophe longer than he expected. He'd thought himself cynical, but Amélie's cynicism was born from experience rather than philosophy. She hadn't chosen to see the world's cruelty. It had been forced on her, branded into her skin, encoded in every law and custom. For the first time in his life, Christophe felt something like shame, but the plan was already in motion. Antoine had finalized the lease on the Rampart Street house. Mathieu had discovered this and confronted his brother in a screaming match that shook the walls. And Amélie continued to see both of them, fanning flames that were already burning out of control. "It's almost time." Christophe told her 3 days before Antoine planned to move her. "The money's ready. I've arranged passage on a riverboat north. You'll travel as my cousin, recently widowed, wearing mourning clothes so no one looks too closely. Once you reach Cincinnati, you connect with people I know in the Underground Railroad, and your brothers. They'll tear each other apart, looking for someone who's already gone." He handed her a packet of documents, forged papers declaring her a free woman of color, letters of introduction, everything she'd need. "By the time they realize what happened, you'll be in Canada." Amélie held the papers like they were made of glass. "Why are you really doing this, Christophe? Don't tell me it's boredom." He considered lying, then decided she deserved truth. "Because watching you break free breaks something in this system. And maybe, just maybe, it breaks something in me, too. The part that knows this is all wrong but does nothing about it. One woman escaping won't end slavery. No. But it'll piss off Antoine, devastate Mathieu, and prove that the system isn't as solid as they believe." He smiled. Sometimes small rebellions matter more than grand ones. But as Christophe left her room that night, passing his brother's shadows on his way, Antoine pacing his study, Mathieu composing another useless poem, he realized the plan had flaws. The Duvil brothers were predictable individually, but together they formed something more dangerous than the sum of their parts. And if they ever united against a common threat, even Amélie's brilliance might not be enough to save her. In her room, Amélie counted her money, reread her documents, and felt the weight of all three brothers, desires pressing down like the humid Louisiana air. Antoine wanted to own her completely. Mathieu wanted to save her. Christophe wanted to free her. None of them simply wanted to leave her alone. She thought of her mother, sold away for a crime she didn't commit. Of the little girl who'd learned to sue before she learned to fear white men. Of all the promises broken and freedom stolen. And she smiled, sharp and certain. Let them think they controlled the game. Let them believe their plans mattered. Amélie had her own plan, and it didn't require any Duvil brothers' permission. Soon, one way or another, this would all be finished. The humidity of late August in New Orleans made everything feel swollen and close to bursting. In Maison Duvil, the same pressure built within its walls, thick enough to choke on. Antoine stood in his study. A letter from the rental agent confirming the Rampart Street house would be ready in 2 days. Everything was arranged, furniture selected, accounts established, even a small wardrobe ordered for Amélie. She would be his official place by society, his property in a way that was somehow more respectable than simple slavery. The logic disgusted him, even as he embraced it. Through the window he saw Mathieu in the garden, pacing like a caged animal. His brother had barely spoken to him since their argument about Amélie. The coldness between them felt like another death in the family. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Christophe entered without waiting for permission, his usual irreverent grin replaced by something harder. "We need to talk," Christophe said, closing the door, "about the fact that you're about to make the stupidest decision of your life." He poured himself bourbon from Antoine's personal decanter, moving Amélie to the quarter, making her your place. "Have you thought about what that means?" Antoine's jaw tightened. "It means I'm following tradition. Half the men in our circle have arrangements like this. Half the men in our circle are idiots." Christophe took a long drink. But let's say you go through with it. You parade her around as your official mistress. What happens to Mathieu? Mathieu will adjust. Will he? Christophe's laugh was bitter. Our brother is in love with her, Antoine. Actual foolish, destructive love. And you're going to lock her away where he can't reach her. How do you think that plays out? Antoine turned fully to face his youngest brother. What makes you think Mathieu is in love with her? Because I have eyes. Because I watch things you're too proud to notice. Christophe set down his glass with deliberate care. He visits her just like you do. Has been for weeks. So you're not just claiming a woman. You're stealing her from your own brother. The words hit Antoine like a fist. That's impossible. Mathieu wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Want the same woman you do. Wouldn't lie to you. Christophe's smile was cruel. We are all liars here, brother. The only difference is I admit it. Antoine felt rage building in his chest. Hot and irrational. You're lying. Trying to manipulate me for some scheme. Am I? Christophe moved to the door. Ask him yourself. Or better yet, watch your window tonight around midnight. See who comes calling after you leave. Then he was gone, leaving Antoine alone with poisonous doubt. That night, Antoine did watch. He positioned himself in the garden shadows, feeling foolish and furious, hoping Christophe was wrong. But at midnight, a figure emerged from the main house, moving quietly toward the quarters. Mathieu. Antoine watched his brother knock softly on Amélie's door. Watched her open it immediately, as if expecting him. Watched Mathieu enter, the door closing behind him with guilty silence. Something broke in Antoine's chest, not his heart. He wasn't sentimental enough for that. But his pride, his certainty, his belief that he controlled anything in this mess. He stood in the garden for an hour, watching candlelight flicker in that window, imagining what was happening inside. When Mathieu finally emerged, Antoine was waiting. Brother. Antoine said softly, stepping from the shadows. Mathieu froze in the moonlight. His face showed everything: guilt, defiance, exhaustion. Antoine. I can explain. Can you? Antoine's voice was deadly calm. Explain how you've been betting the same woman I'm with. Explain how you've betrayed me, betrayed our family, for some enslaved. Don't. Mathieu's interruption was sharp. Don't reduce her to that. She's a person, Antoine. A person we've both used for our own needs while pretending we're different from father. We are different from father. Are we? Mathieu laughed, and the sound held no humor. You're making her your plaything, locking her into another form of slavery. I'm loving her while being too weak to free her. We're both monsters, just different species. Antoine moved closer, his hands clenched. How long? Does it matter? How long? Mathieu, since the garden shed. Maybe a month after father died. Mathieu met his eyes directly. And before you ask, yes, she knows about you. She's known the whole time. The betrayal burned hotter. So she's been playing us both. Or we've both been using her and calling it something else. Mathieu's voice shook. Don't blame her for surviving the only way she can. Antoine wanted to hit him. Wanted to break something, hurt someone. Make the world make sense again through violence. Instead, he asked the question he dreaded. Do you love her? Mathieu's silence was answer enough. God help you. Antoine whispered. God help us both. He turned and walked away, leaving his brother standing in the garden like a ghost. But Antoine didn't return to the house. Instead, he went to his study, poured a full glass of bourbon, and stared at the letter about the Rampart Street house. Everything he'd planned, everything he'd arranged. It all felt hollow now. He'd thought Amélie was his secret, his possession, something that belonged only to him. Learning she'd shared herself with Mathieu transformed the entire relationship into something sordid and cheap. But the worst part, the part that kept him drinking through the night, was the question he couldn't answer. Had Amélie ever wanted any of this? Or had she simply been surviving, giving them what they demanded while hating them all? In her room, Amélie heard the raised voices in the garden and knew the careful balance she'd maintained was fracturing. She'd kept the brothers separate, feeding each one different illusions. But Christophe had forced a confrontation, and now everything was accelerating beyond her control. She pulled out her packed trunk, checking once more that she had everything: money, papers, a few clothes. The riverboat left in 3 days. She just needed to survive until then. A knock made her freeze. Too early for Christophe's usual visits, too angry to be Mathieu returning. Antoine. She opened the door to find him standing there, his face a mask of cold fury. Without a word, he pushed inside, closing the door behind him. "You've been with Mathieu," he said flatly. Not a question. Amélie considered lying, then decided truth might serve her better. "Yes. For how long? Does it matter? Answer me." His voice was quiet, which was somehow worse than shouting. "A month. Maybe more." She lifted her chin. "Did you think you were the only one? That I belonged to you alone?" Antoine laughed, harsh and painful. "I thought. I don't know what I thought. That there was something real between us. Something more than just." "Than just what, Antoine?" "Than just you using me whenever you wanted. Coming to my room, taking what you needed, then leaving." Her anger surprised them both. "You don't get to feel betrayed. I'm the one who's been forced to choose between 3 men who all think they own me." 3. The word came out strangled. Christophe, too. Ask him yourself. She was past caring now, past strategy. Or better yet, ask yourself why it matters. You were planning to move me to Rampart Street. Make me your place A. Another cage with prettier bars. Did you think I'd be grateful? Antoine grabbed her shoulders. Not violently, but desperately. I could have given you a good life. Money, security, protection. Better than you'd have anywhere else. I didn't want a good life from you, Antoine. I wanted my own life. The one your father promised me, and you burned. Tears stung her eyes now, angry tears she'd held back for months. I wanted freedom, and you took it from me again. So yes, I used you. I used all of you. Because it's the only power I have in this God-forsaken place. He released her, stumbling back as if she'd struck him. What are you planning? What makes you think I'm planning anything? Because I know you now. Or I thought I did. His eyes were haunted. You're too smart to be passive. So what is it? Escape? Revenge? Tell me. Amélie laughed bitterly. And what will you do if I tell you, Antoine? Stop me. Kill me. Sell me away like you threatened before. Do whatever you want. I'm already trapped. But Antoine didn't move. He just stood there looking at her with something like grief in his eyes. I thought you cared for me, he said quietly. Even a little. Was it all pretense? The question broke through her anger, revealing something raw beneath. Would it have been better if I'd refused you? If I'd fought and been punished? Would you have felt less guilty if I'd made you force me? That's not what I wanted. Then what did you want? Antoine, my love, my gratitude. She stepped closer, her voice cracking. You can't enslave someone and then demand they love you for it. The truth of it hung between them, ugly and undeniable. Antoine turned away, his shoulders slumped. Keep your secrets, he said finally. Plan whatever you're planning. I don't care anymore. But as he reached the door, he paused. The house on Rampart Street. I'm canceling it. You'll stay here, working as you did before. I won't. I can't. He couldn't finish the sentence. Then he was gone. Amélie sank onto her bed, her body shaking. She'd won something in that confrontation, though it felt like loss. Antoine had been neutralized, his plans abandoned. But now Mathieu and Christophe remained, and the whole house was on edge. 3 days. She just needed 3 more days. The next morning, Mathieu found her in the kitchen, helping prepare breakfast, though her hands shook too badly to be useful. He pulled her aside, his face desperate. "Antoine knows about us," he said. "He's going to do something terrible. I know him. When his pride is wounded. It's almost over, Mathieu. Soon. None of this will matter." "What do you mean?" She almost told him. Almost shared Christophe's plan, the riverboat, the escape. But something stopped her. The memory of all his promises to help, all his declarations of love, all ultimately useless against the reality of his weakness. "Nothing," she said instead. "Just wishful thinking." But Mathieu wasn't fooled. "You're planning something. Let me help. Please, Amélie, let me finally do something that matters." "You want to help?" She pulled away from him. "Then do nothing. Stay in your room. Write your poetry, and when I'm gone, pretend you never knew me. That's the only help I need." "I can't do that. I love you." "Love." The word tasted like ash. "Your love is a luxury I can't afford, Mathieu. It comes with no power, no means, no ability to change anything. It's just another burden for me to carry, while I pretend to be grateful." She left him standing there, destroyed, and felt nothing but exhaustion. That night, all 3 brothers met in the study. The first time they'd been together since their father's funeral. The air crackled with tension, years of resentment, and recent betrayals coalescing into something volatile. "Well," Christophe said, breaking the silence, "this is cozy. 3 brothers who've all bedded the same woman. Very Greek tragedy. Father would be proud." "Shut up," Antoine and Mathieu said in unison, then glared at each other. Christophe laughed. "At least you can still agree on something. That's heartwarming." "Why did you do it?" Antoine asked him. "Why involve yourself with Amélie when you knew what she meant to us?" "Why did you?" Christophe countered. "Why did either of you think you could own a person and call it love?" He poured 3 glasses of bourbon, sliding them across the desk. "We're all guilty here. The question is what we do about it." "What can we do?" Mathieu's voice was hollow. "She hates us, all of us, and she's right too. So we let her go," Christophe said simply. "We give her the freedom Father promised. We do the one decent thing any of us is capable of." Antoine's laugh was bitter. "And become the family that frees its slaves. Do you know what that would mean? The other planters would destroy us. We'd lose everything. Then we lose everything." Mathieu stood, sudden conviction in his voice. "For once in our miserable lives, we do something right." "Noble sentiment," Antoine said, "but impractical. The world doesn't reward nobility, brother. It rewards power. Then let's use our power." Christophe suggested. "Free her. Give her money. Make sure she gets north safely. One woman. One act of rebellion against this sick system." The brothers looked at each other. Antoine with his pride, Mathieu with his conscience, Christophe with his chaos. For a moment, it seemed possible they might unite, might do something decent. Then Antoine shook his head. "No. I won't destroy this family for one enslaved woman, no matter what she means to us. We keep things as they are." "Then you're our father," Mathieu said quietly. "And I'm done pretending otherwise." He left the study, leaving Antoine and Christophe alone. "He'll help her escape," Antoine said. "You know that, right?" "Maybe." Christophe finished his bourbon. "Or maybe she doesn't need any of our help. Maybe she's been 3 steps ahead this entire time, and we're just now realizing we're not the players. We're the pieces." The words hung in the air like prophecy. In her room, Amélie heard furniture breaking, voices raised, the sound of the Duvil brothers finally tearing themselves apart. She counted her money one last time, checked her papers, and waited for the riverboat that would carry her away from this place forever. 2 more days. Just 2 more days. The morning of the riverboat's departure arrived with unseasonable coolness, as if even the weather knew something was ending. Amélie woke before dawn, dressed in the black morning clothes Christophe had provided, and took one final look at the room that had been her cage and kingdom for so many years. She left nothing behind except the fine dresses Antoine had given her, laid out on the bed like shed skins. In her small trunk were only essentials, the forged papers declaring her a free woman of color. Mrs. Amélie Beaumont, recently widowed, traveling north to live with relatives in Cincinnati. Christophe was waiting in the garden, dressed for travel himself. He'd escort her to the docks as her concerned cousin. In the pre-dawn darkness, his face looked older, more serious than usual. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "I've been ready for years." They walked through the sleeping plantation, past the quarters where people were just beginning to stir, past the main house where the Duvil empire was crumbling from within. No one stopped them. Christophe had ensured the night guards were stationed elsewhere. At the property's edge, where garden met woods, Mathieu stepped from the shadows. "I knew you'd try to leave," he said, and his voice held no anger, only sadness. "I just wanted to say goodbye properly." Amélie's chest tightened. "You should go back to the house, Mathieu. Forget you saw us." "I can't forget you." He moved closer. "But I can help. I have money too. More than Christophe could steal. And I know people in Philadelphia who—" "Stop." She held up her hand. "Your help comes with chains attached. Even if you can't see them. The best thing you can do for me is nothing." "That's not fair." "Nothing about this is fair." Her voice softened despite herself. "But thank you, Mathieu, for seeing me as a person. That's more than most." She kissed his cheek gently, a benediction and a goodbye. Then she walked past him, following Christophe toward the road where a hired carriage waited. Mathieu watched them go, his heart breaking in the quiet way hearts do when they've known all along they were fighting for something already lost. He didn't try to follow. That, at least, was the one decent thing he could offer, letting her leave. The riverboat was a grand affair. 3 decks of white paint and gilt trim, its paddle wheel churning the Mississippi's brown water. First-class passengers, wealthy planters and their families, merchants, a few free people of color traveling with careful documentation. Boarded up a carpeted gangway, Amélie and Christophe presented their papers to the porter, who barely glanced at them before waving them aboard. The ease of it felt surreal after months of planning. Was freedom always this simple if you had the right documentation and the right skin tone? They found her cabin, small but private, with a narrow bed and a porthole overlooking the river. Christophe set down her trunk and turned to face her. "This is where I leave you," he said. "Once the boat launches, you're on your own. In Cincinnati, look for a preacher named Reverend William. He'll help you reach Canada." "Why did you really do this?" Amélie asked. "The truth, Christophe, not the speeches about rebellion." He was quiet for a moment. "Because watching you was like watching myself, if I'd been born on the other side of the color line. Both of us trapped by circumstances we didn't create. Both of us trying to game a system designed to crush us." He smiled sadly. "And because maybe, just once, I wanted to be the hero of a story instead of the villain." "You're not a hero." "No, but I'm not entirely the villain either." He kissed her forehead, brotherly and final. "Goodbye, Amélie. I hope you find whatever you're looking for up north." Then he was gone, leaving her alone as the riverboat's horn blasted departure. Amélie stood at her porthole, watching New Orleans recede. The docks, the warehouses, the elegant homes of the Garden District. And somewhere in that sprawl, Maison Duvil and everything it represented. She touched the freedom papers in her pocket, still half expecting someone to burst through the door and drag her back. But no one came. The boat churned northward, carrying her away from Louisiana and into an uncertain future. Freedom, she was learning, felt less like victory and more like vertigo. The ground suddenly absent beneath feet that had forgotten how to walk without chains. At Maison Duvil, Antoine discovered her absence at breakfast. Her door stood open, the fine dresses arranged on the bed like a deliberate message. He stood in her empty room, feeling something crack in his chest. Not love exactly, but the loss of something he'd convinced himself was real. In the main house, he found Mathieu in the drawing room staring at nothing. "She's gone," Antoine said flatly. "I know." Mathieu didn't look at him. "I watched her leave. And you did nothing to stop her. What would you have had me do? Drag her back? Lock her up?" Mathieu's laugh was hollow. "For once, brother, I did exactly what she needed. I let her go." Antoine sank into their father's chair, suddenly exhausted. Christophe helped her. The money, the papers. It had to be him, too. Does it matter now? No. And Antoine realized with surprise that it truly didn't. Amélie was gone, carrying with her pieces of all three brothers. Antoine's pride, Mathieu's conscience, Christophe's chaos. They'd each tried to possess her in different ways, and she'd survived them all. "What do we do now?" Mathieu asked. "Nothing. We tell everyone she ran away. We hire catchers to make a show of searching, and then we let the story die." Antoine rubbed his eyes tiredly. "The alternative is admitting a slave outwitted 3 Duvil brothers. Our reputation wouldn't survive it." "Our reputation?" Mathieu's voice was bitter. "That's what you care about. Not that we failed her. Not that we perpetuated father's sins. Just that people might laugh at us. What would you have me care about, Mathieu? She's gone. We can't change what we did or what we are. We can only move forward." But moving forward proved harder than Antoine expected. The brothers existed in a state of cold détente, barely speaking, each haunted by different versions of the same ghost. The house felt emptier somehow, as if Amélie's absence had revealed that Maison Duvil was just expensive walls around nothing of value. 2 weeks after her escape, Christophe found Antoine in the study holding a letter. "Well," Christophe asked. "What's that?" "Report from the catchers I hired. They traced her to Cincinnati, then lost the trail heading toward Canada." Antoine set down the letter carefully. "She made it. She's free. Good." Christophe poured himself bourbon, not bothering to offer any to his brother. "She deserved that much." "Did she?" Antoine looked at him with hollow eyes. "Or did she just use us, manipulate us, destroy us for her own ends? Does it matter? We used her first. We used her for years." Christophe took a long drink. "Everything she did was just responding to what we'd already done. We don't get to play victim." Antoine wanted to argue but found he couldn't. The truth was exhausting, revealing how complicit they'd all been in a system that ground people into commodities and called it natural law. "I loved her," Antoine said quietly. "Or I thought I did. Now I don't know if what I felt was real or just ownership with better packaging." "Can love mean anything between enslaver and enslaved?" Christophe asked. "Can you really love someone you have the legal right to rape and sell? Or is it all just elaborate self-deception?" The question hung between them, unanswerable. In Canada, in a boarding house in Toronto run by formerly enslaved people who'd made the same journey, Amélie sat by a window watching snowfall, something she'd never seen before. The cold was shocking, brutal, nothing like Louisiana's humidity. But it was a free cold, and that made all the difference. She thought about the Duvil brothers sometimes. Wondered if they'd destroyed each other yet, or found some way to continue their empty empire. She tried to hate them and found she mostly pitied them. Three men so trapped by their own privilege they couldn't see the bars. Antoine with his desperate need for control, never understanding that real power meant letting go. Mathieu with his useless conscience, loving suffering more than preventing it. Christophe with his nihilistic honesty, seeing the systems rot but changing nothing. Different prisons, all self-built. A knock interrupted her thoughts. The boarding housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, poked her head in. "Letter for you, dear." Came all the way from Louisiana. Amélie hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was Mathieu's, elegant, careful, painfully sincere. The letter was short. "I hope you found what you were looking for. I hope the North is kinder than the South. I hope you think of us sometimes without hatred, though we deserve it. The plantation is failing. Antoine has no heart for it anymore. Christophe drinks himself toward an early grave, and I write poems that change nothing. You were right about everything. Our love was just another cage. Our promises were lies we told ourselves. We were never going to save you because we never even tried to save ourselves. But I want you to know, in whatever small insufficient way I'm capable of, I loved you. Not as property, not as possession, but as the woman who showed me the truth about who I was. Thank you for that, even though it destroyed me. Be free, Amélie. Be everything we couldn't let you be. M." Amélie folded the letter carefully and placed it in her trunk alongside the forged papers and the gold coins Christophe had stolen. Evidence of a life left behind. She didn't write back. What would she say? That she pitied him? That she'd used them all and felt no guilt? That freedom was colder and harder than she'd imagined, but still infinitely preferable to the warmest slavery. There were no words adequate to the space between them, the gulf of experience that could never be bridged by good intentions or belated apologies. Instead, she turned back to the window, watching snow fall on a city where no one owned her, where her body was her own, where she could walk any street without papers or permission. It wasn't paradise. She cleaned houses for wealthy white families who treated her with the same casual contempt they'd have shown in Louisiana. She lived in a tiny room and wore thin clothes in brutal cold. Freedom, she discovered, didn't mean comfort or safety or even basic dignity, but it meant choice. And choice, however limited, was everything. Years later, the story would be told in New Orleans. How the beautiful Amélie had seduced 3 brothers and vanished like smoke. How the Duvil family had fallen into ruin soon after, Antoine dying in a duel over a business dispute, Mathieu disappearing north, rumored to be working with abolitionists, Christophe drinking himself to death before his 30th birthday. Some said she'd been a curse sent to punish the Duvils for their sins. Others claimed she was an angel offering redemption they'd rejected. A few whispered she'd been a real woman trapped in impossible circumstances, doing what any of them would do to survive. The truth, as always, was more complicated and less satisfying than legend. But on certain nights, when the moon hung low over the French Quarter, and the air smelled of magnolia and decay, people swore they saw a woman with amber eyes walking Rampart Street, smiling as if she remembered the night she made brothers into enemies and turned love into ruin. They called her wicked. They called her temptress. They called her destroyer of men. History calls her unforgettable. But history rarely asks what it takes to be remembered, or who pays the price for becoming legend. In Toronto, Amélie lived another 40 years. She married eventually. A freedman from Virginia who asked nothing of her past and offered simple kindness. They had 3 children who grew up knowing their mother had been enslaved, but never knowing the whole truth of what she'd endured or what she'd done to escape. She told them only this: never let anyone make you a story. Be your own story. Write your own ending. And when she died in 1894, surrounded by grandchildren who'd never known slavery, her last words were reported to be, "I was free. Finally, completely. I was free." Whether she meant free from Louisiana, free from the Duvil brothers, or free from her own past is something history can't answer. But in New Orleans, the story persisted. 3 brothers destroyed by one woman's beauty. A family empire crumbled over forbidden desire. Justice or tragedy, depending on who told the tale. The truth was simpler and more terrible. An enslaved woman survived the only way she could. And survival sometimes requires becoming the monster others already believe you are. That's the cruel secret of Amélie, the one New Orleans never quite understood. She didn't seduce 3 brothers for revenge or pleasure. She did it because in a world where she had no power, she created power from the only resource available: their desire, their guilt, their need to believe they were better than their father. She made them enemies not through witchcraft, but through mirrors, showing each brother what he most feared about himself: Antoine's cruelty, Matthew's weakness, Christophe's nihilism. And then she walked away, leaving them to face their reflections alone. That's not wickedness. That's survival elevated to art. History calls her unforgettable, because we need to believe in a woman powerful enough to destroy men with a glance. We need villains and temptresses to explain away the guilt of systems that grind people into nothing. But Amélie was neither villain nor temptress. She was just a woman trying to breathe in a world designed to suffocate her. And somehow, impossibly, she found air. That's the story. Not of seduction, but of survival. Not of destruction, but of escape. And if 3 brothers destroyed themselves in the process, well, they'd been destroying themselves long before Amélie entered their lives. She simply held up a mirror and let them see.